I was starting to be alive and being more myself again. It's on one of my guys, so it's easy when it's a bad guy. I mean, that's why we're there, or do a better job than I could.
Thanks so much for joining us again. We're excited to share with you some incredible content today. You know, often the first to respond to the needs of other people are often the last to seek help for themselves. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's all sorts of talk today around, is there a stigma around mental health? But the thing that we're going to be focusing on today is not really talking about necessarily just the mental health side, although that is a critical piece. We're going to talk about something even deeper also, which are the soul wounds. How does spirituality, how does faith factor into trauma? And that's really what all of these interviews are about. Today we're going to actually be sitting with Matt, who's been so gracious to sit with us and share his story. And he's got a pretty fascinating career, both in the military but also in law enforcement. And so if you're watching this and perhaps you're somebody who has served in that capacity, either in the first responder world or in the military world, or maybe you have a loved one who's currently serving and you're kind of concerned about some of the things you may be seeing in them or things that you used to see that maybe aren't there anymore, some optimism, some trust. We're going to get into some of that today, and we're going to share with you some strategies that hopefully you can use in your own life or in the person's life you love to be able to start healing and hopefully find hope after trauma. So Matt, man, thank you so much
Absolutely.
for being here. So I guess first, let's go way back. Let's go way, way back. So what age were you when you decided to join the military?
Well, that's way back.
Yeah.
So I was 19 when I first enlisted.
And you're 22 today.
23. Thank
23,
you.
nice. So, okay, so you're 19 years old. What prompted you to join the military?
So after I graduated, I tried the college thing for a couple of years and realized what I already knew, that college really wasn't the environment for me.
Yeah.
So that's when I chose to enlist. I went in as a military police soldier.
Okay. So, so you were enlisted once, but you got out.
Correct. Hey, I was that guy, 2-year contract. It was pre 9/11, and when I went to re-enlist, I asked for a bonus. They said your bonus was a 2-year contract. Now you got to get back to the Army.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm 21. I'm old enough to go through police academy. That's the path I was headed down all along. So, thank you for the opportunity.
See you later.
I'm taking my college money and I'm going to.
And so you end up becoming, you work for the city police, but you also end up in the sheriff's department.
Correct.
In Ohio. So at some point you decided, I've had enough with traditional law enforcement. I want to go back to being an MP.
So the motivation for me was a lot of my buddies and guys that I knew from my previous enlistment, they weren't coming home, or if they were coming home, they were coming home and they were really struggling. And how,
because 9/11 had happened by this point.
Correct. And how is it that I can reasonably sit at home and work the job that I have and have the opportunities that I do and not having done my part to serve the military like I initially wanted to do anyways?
Yeah. So you re-enlist, second time around. This time, you know you're not staying in garrison. You know you're not going to be working on the side of a mountain. So you deploy to Afghanistan.
Correct.
So you're now downrange, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing the details. You're working the job. Was deployment harder than you expected, or was it about the same?
There was no one that could have explained to me the impact it would have had on me.
Really?
Yeah, it was unlike anything I hope to ever experience again.
Really? How so?
So three days in, they hit our fob with a VBEID, a vehicle borne ID, and I had my guys out there, like from the explosion, it had blown over into the motor pool, and we were trying to roll out to go and respond because it was a complex attack, and we couldn't get out because of all the debris. To mentally prepare for something like that, I don't see how it's even possible. It was a matter of experiencing it and us working together as our squad and working through that, and just Charlie Mike, just continue mission.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and so you experienced that, and here you are, having done previous law enforcement, you've seen some probably not awesome things.
Sure.
Right? And so compared to an MP who maybe just was 21 years old and brand new MP, right? I mean, in theory, you're more seasoned.
Right. And I think that was one of the biggest things on why I was sent home early. My first sergeant, though, my personal opinions aside, he was pretty smart in recognizing that I was on a struggle bus. we would do 3 days out, and we would come back and we would refit and resupply. Then we would go back out and we would do our overnights. So the nights that we were back on the fob, I would typically get about 2 or 3 hours of pretty solid sleep. But while we were out, like any reasonable guy is going to do, I went around and checked on my guys. So I think between the loss of sleep and just the always being on and on. And
do you feel like for you, was that the moment that changed your trajectory, for maybe the worst temporarily, or was it like a slow decline, right? Because I mean, for some people, there's like a moment of trauma that they know, I'm changed forever. And there's other people, I think, who trauma really is like, it's more like a series of paper cuts, right? Over a period of time, they're changing. Which do you feel like more personifies how you are?
So I think the initial one for me wasn't the VBEID, but it was when my buddy's truck got hit, and there was a transition piece between me and another guy that was possibly replacing me. So I wasn't necessarily in the right seat to make all the calls on how he dealt with that, but it put my buddy's truck on its top, and I'm back there, and we're using our helmet, our ACHs to dig out the doors to get all the guys pulled out of the truck. So pulling them out of the truck, and that was the first time that I put my hands on one of my guys. So it's easy when it's a bad guy. I mean, that's why we're there.
Right.
But when I put my hands on my guy and seeing the condition that he was in, I think that was what's
something snapped.
Yes. And then from that point forward, it was kind of the paper cuts after that.
So you mentioned that somebody who was wiser, a little more experienced, despite what you wanted, decided, you know what, Matt, appreciate what you're doing. You've been under a lot of strain. Your role is critical here. Why don't you go ahead and go on home early? How did that make you feel when that came down? Were you relieved or were you upset?
I was not relieved. It's one of those situations where that responsibility and ownership was on my shoulders to make sure my guys were okay, and otherwise nobody else was more capable than I was, knowing what we had been in, what we had dealt with, the ticks that we've been engaged in, that camaraderie that we had. Nobody else could reasonably replace me.
Got it.
Or do a better job than I could.
So when you left, you felt like you were basically forced to leave.
Oh, I had no choice.
You had no choice. At what point did you realize, you know what, some of those things that happened over there are still impacting me here stateside?
So to me, it all made sense when I got home. My wife met my kids. They picked me up. We go home. Day number 2 of being home, I told my wife, forget you. I want a divorce. I'm going to the barracks. And the best thing that I found that worked for me was whiskey and lots of it. Right. But once I started seeing the look on my kid's face and the effect that I was having because of how I was living, what it was doing to them, that's when I started going to the Army doctors and trying to go to behavioral health and be proactive about it. So I go to Korea, I continue drinking, and there was no rules. Like, I don't have a wife, I don't have to be a father, I'm here by myself in my unit. So the drinking got extremely bad at that point, and it was from Korea to here at Fort Campbell that I was like, I really need to get deliberate about getting healthy.
But what was it that motivated you to want to change? Was it just the fact that you knew you were coming back here? I mean, what was it inside of you that said, you know what's been going on in Korea, like, it's over?
Neighbor across the street invited us to Life Point, the church where my wife and I are now members. And I started attending church. I was like, man, I forgot how this felt.
Wow.
Like, I actually felt like I was starting to be alive and being more myself again.
Yeah.
There was this ridiculous small group that my wife kept telling me, hey, you need to check this out. You need to check it out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she told me about Reboot. And I was like, look, I'm not going to sit around and tell all these guys any kind of mess because his story is always worse than mine. He had it worse than I did. And that's not going to help me heal.
Right.
And then as I started to build those friendships within the church and seeing the people that had graduated or that were actively leading the group, I was like, man, I got it. Like,
right.
God was yelling and screaming at me. So I finally just embraced it and went and started going to Reboot.
Was there a certain week or topic that you felt like, wow, it's because obviously it's a 12-week long trauma healing course specifically designed for combat veterans. So you were in a room with other combat veterans. Was there a specific topic or two that you felt like just really cut through the noise and spoke to some exact things you had been feeling and struggling with?
The unforgiveness and the false guilt.
Yeah. So tell me what about unforgiveness? Unforgiveness of you forgiving yourself or forgiving other people? Or?
So I found that I'm really good at having that conversation with somebody, and it's easy for you and I to kind of work through things. But once it gets down to the roots for me, that I'm not willing to forgive myself, because I need to hold myself accountable for things that I did or didn't do or said or didn't say.
Yeah.
So being able to overcome that, I'm still trying to deal with it.
One of the things that we've talked about a lot is sometimes people don't forgive themselves because they almost feel like they need to do time for a crime they've committed, right? That somehow
Absolutely.
they can, hold themselves accountable. Maybe that would make it right.
I got to pay that penance.
Right? What was it you were trying to pay off, though?
First, that I was incapable of doing the job that I should have done while I was deployed.
Yeah.
Realizing now that I was there for the time I was meant to be there and did the job I was required to do, as well as at home with my wife, that knowing that my wife deserved better and my kids deserve to be happy and laugh, and not for me to take that away from them. So when I used to be that guy that would chase them around the house and tickle them and play, I was that guy that was chasing them around the house, yelling, cussing, and screaming.
Right.
So to do that to the ones I love the most, how can I reasonably deserve to be a part of that?
Yeah. One of the things that Matt talked about really specifically that I want to kind of zone in on here is this idea of unforgiveness towards ourselves. The Bible talks about how we need to forgive our enemies. We need to love our enemies. But it's so challenging because so often I feel like we are our own worst enemies, and yet we're unable to forgive ourselves. And I think about Scripture where it says that if you're unwilling or unable to forgive someone, God says, that's how I'll treat you. In other words, if we don't forgive, God won't forgive us. And so when we don't forgive ourselves or someone else, what we're literally doing is we're actually blocking God's forgiveness. We're blocking His blessing into our own lives. Think about the profoundness of that thought. That maybe the key to open up the dam of blessings and forgiveness in your heart and in your life is actually your ability to first say, you know what, I'm going to forgive myself. And that doesn't mean that somehow you're absolving yourself of all wrongdoing. Because the truth is that all of us have made huge mistakes, and none of us can undo those things. Equally, we're human. We can only be one place, one time for so long. But when we start to say, you know what, I'm going to embrace my limitations, and in that I'm going to forgive myself because I'm understanding that my limitations is all that I operated to the max of my ability. All of a sudden there's freedom in that. And the other thing that really connects to this is this idea of isolation. If you are feeling isolated right now, we want you to plug in to something somewhere that can help. Maybe that's a Reboot Alliance course. You could go to rebootalliance.com. Find a course location near you of combat veterans or first responders who could help you be able to heal through that. Maybe that's your local church, as it was for Matt. And maybe it's a multi-step process. Maybe you start off. But as we heard, I hope that you hear, the answer is not going to be found by just going down to the local club, local bar, and trying to drink away those feelings. Because eventually those feelings, if they're not interpreted and understood will actually drive you deeper into despair, deeper into hopelessness. And ultimately, as we've heard with other people on the show before, maybe even suicide. And so we want to encourage you, we want to let you know that you're not alone, that there actually is hope after trauma. And Matt, I wanted to thank you again today for coming in. Really honored to hear your story. And hopefully you can find a bit of your story in his story as well. And hopefully you'll have some of the same outcomes and healing that he's experienced. Thanks.
With over 10,000 titles, it would be impossible for us to show you everything on Pureflix.com. But let's give it a shot.